last tutorial, we had a lot of fun making a very cool but very impractical bomber. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how we can make a much more practical, much easier to build bomber that can be used for general purpose trench digging. The flying machines here are based on the flying machines in Omego's World Eater. However, these are some pretty standard TNT dupers attached to a pretty standard flying machine. And then I set up the actual takeoff and return stations that are used by this bomber. Each individual flying machine is really only going to reliably blow up about 3 blocks wide. So for most purposes, you're probably going to want multiple flying machines. But we're going to start with just one. You'll see that it's fairly easy to build and it's not much harder to build in multiples. And you're probably going to want to place it about 30 blocks above the highest point that you're trying to blow up to make sure that the TNT doesn't bounce up and blow up the machine itself. So in my world, the Y level is at Y level 60, so we're going to build it at Y level 90, but if you got hills or anything like that, you're probably going to want to build it quite a bit higher. Now, it will blow up about 85 blocks down, so you may need 2 machines if you want to blow up all the way down to bedrock, but that's one of the big advantages of this being so easy to build is you just tear down the first one, set up a second one. It does not take very long at all. So I've created this red zone here. This is the area that we're going to blow up with this one flying machine. So we're going to go 1 block inside the red zone, and I'm going to scaffolding up to my Y level. In my case, it's Y level 90. So I've scaffolded up to 1 block lower than I want to start my build at. So we can see here in my F3 screen, I'm looking at Y level 89. I want to place a temporary block on top of that. While standing on the temporary block, facing in towards my red zone on the left side, I want to place another temporary block on the side of my scaffolding here. I will need that for later. Place a slime block on top of that second temporary block. And then going towards the back, I'm going to place a slime block on the back of that and a slime block on top of it. And then I'm also going to place a slime block on top of my first temporary block. And I'm going to come back a block from that and place a slime block on top of that. So we've got our scaffolding, our temporary block, little L shape here. And then on the other side, little L shape here. This is going to be the right side. This is going to be the left side. So on the left side, let's go to the back. Place a temporary block on the end of it. Slime block on the end of that. And then on the right side, we'll place a slime block on the right side of this slime block. And 2 slime blocks on top of that. So we got an L shape here that matches up with this one. And we're going to stand on this L shape here, remove this temporary block, and place a sticky piston facing towards the back of the machine. And then we're going to come up over to the front. We're going to place a wall on the end of the right side. And then in Obsidian, right next to that wall on the left side. This will keep us from accidentally triggering the machine. We're going to update a few observers that would do that, and we don't want that to happen. And then we want to come down. We've still got this temporary block right here. You can place a TNT up against it underneath the wall, and this is safe to place the TNT now. And we're going to remove that temporary block, and then we want to place a detector rail pointing in towards that wall and place a minecart on top of it. And we're going to come over here. So this sticky piston, the slime block behind it, on the side of that, we want to place a coral fan. Doesn't matter what color, it will die. And you can also just place the dead version if you already have that. But it's got to be one of the fan varieties of the coral. And there we go. And so the first this temporary block that we placed, we want to place some blocks on the side of that so we can step down here and place an observer facing straight down into this slime block right here. That'll power this sticky piston. Probably need another temporary block so we can jump up here, and we can remove all these temporary blocks now. And we want to come up over here. We can place a sticky piston facing straight forward like so. And that'll be between these 2 slime blocks. Place 2 temporary blocks on top of this slime block on the end here. Remove the first one so we can place an observer facing straight down. Make sure you have placed this obsidian. If you have not placed the obsidian, when you remove this block right here, it would trigger off the whole machine, and you do not want that. So this is the flying machine. Now we need the little docking station, so we'll place a temporary block on the end going towards the back of this observer here, and then we're going to place an obsidian on the end of that. Remove the temporary block, place an observer facing in towards the obsidian. Then we're going to place redstone dust on top of the obsidian, and place a lever on the back of it, power that lever, place a redstone repeater on 2 ticks on top of the first observer here, the one facing in towards the obsidian. And then we want to place a fence gate, a trapdoor, on top of the downward facing observer. And again, if you had not placed the obsidian, that would have triggered off the whole machine. Now it is actually safe at this point to remove the obsidian. If you wanted to, just make sure not to update this observer or this trapdoor or the switch until you're ready to actually fire off the machine. Now the return station on the other side is only a few blocks. It's very easy to build, but you need to be very careful to make sure that it's positioned properly. So we want to place, on the other side, we want to place an obsidian block so that it runs up against this block right here. So it's going to be on the left side of the machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at these coordinates right here. We got, first of all, we're going to look at what direction we're facing. We're facing in towards the red zone. We're facing positive X. So the X dimension is actually going to change. We want to keep the Y dimension and the Z dimension to be the same. So we can see here the Y is 91. It's going to be 1 block higher than what we started with on this side, 91. And we want to keep the Z dimension the same. That's going to be 122. And then over here on the other side, you can see on the left side here, or on the right side if we're facing back in towards the flying machine, you look at this coordinate, you can see that the Z is 122. So again, 1 block in from the edge of our border, we're going to scaffolding up. This time we're going to scaffolding up to Y level 90, and we're going to place an obsidian block on top of that. That'll place it at Y level 91. And then we're up here, you can see the targeted block, Y level 90. Want to place an obsidian on top of that block. So again, it's at Y level 91. And then we're facing in towards the red zone on the left side. We want to place a temporary block so we can place an observer facing straight up on top of it. Leave the temporary block there for a second. Place a temporary block on top of our obsidian so we can place 2 glass blocks, one of them going in towards the center here. And then we're going to have to temporary block over here so we can place a piston facing straight down at the end of our glass blocks right here, like so. So remove these 2 temporary blocks, remove this temporary block, place redstone dust on top of the observer and this first glass block, and then a repeater on 4 ticks right here. And then if you remove this temporary block right here, you should actually see the piston fire. And that's all that's required for the docking station. So let's remove all this scaffolding. And now we're ready to fire, and all we have to do to fire this machine is flick the lever right here, and it will go back and forth on its own. It will fire TNT in both directions, and if you ever need to stop it, you just flick the switch again. If it's powered, it is stopped. It will not operate again, and if it's unpowered, it will go back and forth automatically on its own. And here you can see the trench that was created, and it's actually got this nice smooth bottom on it, which is kind of nice. And while it does generally blow up 5 blocks wide, you will see that it will only reliably blow up 3 blocks wide. There are a few points where it's only 3 blocks wide. So if you want it to be reliable, you can only really rely on it being 3 blocks wide. Like I said, you're probably going to want multiples of this flying machine in order to blow up a trench of a decent size. So you can build these right next to each other. Just make sure there's a 2-block gap between the takeoff stations, and that should create a 1-block gap in between each of the individual flying machines. Obviously, if they were right next to each other, these slimes would stick to each other and the flying machines wouldn't actually go anywhere, but you can place them this close to each other and then leave the switches on and leave them powered for right now. If you want to be really safe, you can come up front and place obsidian in front of all of them, but if you're careful, that shouldn't be necessary. We can just come over here and build a bridge across like so. And then we want to place comparators. So this is where we're going to place the 1 switch. So place comparators going in this direction. That'll keep each of the circuits from interfering with each other. And then if you want to, you can just place redstone, or I like using a repeater on a delay. That'll fire them off in kind of a diagonal pattern. And we'll see that in a second. And then once you've got all that connected, now it's safe to remove these levers here, like so. And then on the other side, we actually don't have to do anything. Those are just independent return stations. And then we can just fire this off. And you'll see it'll fire it off with a little bit of a delay. And we'll get a nice diagonal pattern. And that's all you need to do. And here we can see the nice, fairly clean trench that it created. And you can also see here that you might occasionally have a few floating blocks that remain. If you run this for long enough, it will eventually remove all the floating blocks. You just have to wait for the randomness of the TNT to actually hit this block, but you might actually have to run it for a few hours in order for that to happen. So depending on the size of the trench, for a trench this size, you might only have a couple, and you could probably just remove these on your own. But if you had a really large trench, you might just want to run it for a few hours to make sure that there are no floating blocks to remain. And so there we have it. I have built this flying machine quite a few times, and I found it quite useful, so I decided I wanted to make a tutorial. Maybe other people would find it useful as well. I hope you did. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope to see you again real soon. Bye now!